Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am going to attempt to talk you through what I read in the month of May. Now I say attempt for a couple of reasons. First of all, we had an incredibly random power outage just now, just before I started filming. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. And secondly, as I mentioned in my last video, in May, I was incredibly busy with some wonderful things, but also some really stressful and anxiety inducing things. So overall, my time and my headspace for reading a physical book just disappeared for a solid couple of weeks. I am sorry to say. I did do my best, and audiobooks have been saving my life. I'm still listening to audiobooks on my commutes, and that has been wonderful for my mental health and also for my reading progress. So I am very grateful to have access to those. Overall, I have found that I'm just reaching for TV and indeed for craft projects. There's a wonderfully meditative quality to cross-stitching and knitting and crocheting that's been really helping these days. But overall, I will start with a book that I was nearly finished with when I did my last wrap-up, and that is Human Rights by Juno Dawson. Yes, I finally finished this last book in the series, and I love this series. I have loved the first two books. You have heard me rave about them if you've been here for any length of time. I didn't love this one as much, only because I felt like the way in which everything was solved felt extremely random and also extremely rushed. If we had been able to take our time with a lot of the concepts that Juno Dawson introduced in this book, I feel like maybe I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. But I still wholeheartedly recommend this entire series, and I can't really explain my thoughts more than that without giving things away. But do let me know if you have read this series and or if you had similar thoughts about this particular book. Another physical book I read in May was Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. I know this is a staple of British YA, but it's very hard to find here in the US, so I was thrilled when I got a copy. And I have to say, I flew through it. It is very compelling. If you, like me, were unfamiliar with this series, as it turns out, it is one of the early dystopian fiction books where society has been divided along racial lines. So there are the Noughts, who are worth nothing, as per their name, and then there are the Crosses, who hold all the societal power. The Crosses are the Black folks, and the Noughts are the white folks. So it really uses this dystopia to explore systemic racism and injustice that has been all too real in the Western world for far too long. And in the middle of this, we follow Sephi and Callum, who were childhood friends. They were raised together. And as they grow up, they become increasingly star-crossed lovers. And what comes of that as they realize the system that they're in, as they realize their feelings for each other, and how is this going to work? Major trigger warnings going in. This is a tough read. It is really hard to the point where I don't know if I can bring myself to read the rest of the books in the series if I find them. I don't know if emotionally I can put myself through that, which speaks to how well Mallory Blackman wrote this, and I completely understand why this is such a beloved favorite of so many people. So if that premise sounds interesting to you, I do highly encourage you to read it. It is incredibly well done, but I don't know if I'm ready to go on with this series, but I am very glad that I finally experienced it for myself. I also finally managed to finish Great Writers and the Cats Who Owned Them by Susanna Fullerton. I love Susanna Fullerton. She has written a number of books about Jane Austen. I actually met her at the 2016 AGM for the Jane Austen Society of North America, and she is thoroughly delightful. That being said, given that she wrote a book about cats, that was incredible to me. I am a huge cat person. I do love dogs, don't get me wrong, but I've always been more attracted to cats as a pet. And so I was intrigued to see what writers we know of that owned cats and what their experiences with them were, what they had to say about the experience, all of those things. This wasn't my favorite because, let's face it, how many authors do write extensively about their pets and how much of that writing survives? So there wasn't a whole lot to go on, which did make this book a bit dry. There are some incredibly amusing anecdotes, like the way in which Dickens's deaf cat managed to get his attention. Cats have not changed in hundreds and hundreds of years. So overall, I am thrilled to have this. It's a sweet read, it's a quick read, but that's really all I can say about it. It does exactly what it says on the tin. Then we come to audiobooks, and the first audiobook I finished, which also I have as a physical book, is The Duke's Children by Anthony Trollope. This is the last book in the Palliser series. It's the last Trollope audiobook that I have as read by Sir Timothy West. So it was a very bittersweet experience getting to the end of this. I still have many more Trollopes to read, but I only have them as physical books. And this journey has taken several years of my life to get to this point. Given that it's the last in a 6-book series, I can't say a lot about the plot of this, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know some of you in the comments were telling me that there are later editions of this book that include a lot more material, that Trollope was encouraged to cut a lot of material by his editor. And someday I may read that version. I'm sure it lends so much more depth to the Duke's relationships with all of his various children. But even without that information, I could still understand exactly where he was coming from, where they were coming from, and why they were having the conflicts that they were. It's astonishing to me how much of the 1920s fop we can begin to see developing here in the 1870s or 1880s. And it really makes me wonder about how much more quickly trends are happening these days as compared to how they seem to have developed in the past. Or is that just my imagination? I don't know. But overall, a really wonderful, if bittersweet, read. Then, in terms of other audiobooks, I listened to 2 more books in the Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon series by Beth Brower. I listened to volumes 4 and 5, and I thoroughly enjoy this series. Being journals, they do flow on a continuum, so I couldn't tell you about specific plot points that happen in one book versus the other since I listened to them right in a row, but they are just delightful. I've heard them described as being very Anne of Green Gables-esque in their style, and I think that's very apt in terms of stuff does happen. There is general plot, but it's not an overarching plot of the novel. It's very much slice of life, everyday happenings, usually with some ridiculous scrape that Emma gets herself into. I am loving the various developing relationships, and I really can't imagine where all of these relationships are going to go. To be honest, it almost has me considering polyamory as a solution for Emma, not for me. I doubt Beth Brower is going to go there, so I am very intrigued to see how she is going to resolve this. I am in the middle of volume 6 at the moment, and there are 2 more after that, so we will see how these go, but I am thoroughly loving this series. And finally, another of my Libby holds came in, so I listened to 100 Rules for Living to 100 by Dick Van Dyke. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's Dick Van Dyke's advice and life lessons that he has learned in his now 100 years on this planet. And it's just fun. It's fun. It's nice. It's a nice insight into his life. Towards the end, he does begin to muse on death quite a bit, and hearing that from his perspective would make anyone quite teary to start with, but then with all of these stressors I have been under recently, it made it doubly excruciating to listen to. But apart from that, it is very cheery and hopeful, and I thoroughly encourage you to give it a listen if you're interested. Disappointingly, Dick Van Dyke does not read all of it himself as I thought he had. Given that he is now 100 years old, he's moving a lot more slowly, which he is very open about in this book. And as you hear more and more about his physical limitations these days, you do begin to realize, ah, yes, you couldn't have read an entire audiobook for yourself. So he does come on in the beginning and give you a little hello message, but the rest of it is read by Tom Bergeron, who is lovely, but that was slightly disappointing to discover. So, those are all of the books that I read in May. Let me know down below if you have any further questions about these or what your favorite read of the month was. Let me know where you go in terms of comfort reads. I would be very intrigued for some recommendations, or how to deal with stress induced reading slumps. I welcome all advice and prayers and just lovely chats with you in the comments. And until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye, everyone.